Welcome to the Pogchamps 3 recap video of the match between Pokimane and Rubius. Let's jump straight in. So in game 1, Pokimane started with the white pieces. We have d4, d5, bishop to f4. We have the London system by Pokimane. And black develops all of their queenside pieces, their queenside bishop, knight, and queen very quickly, which probably means black is looking to castle queenside as quickly as possible. We have bishop to b5. Which is a pretty permanent pin, because even if black castles and gets the king out of this diagonal, the queen is still here. And this could lead to possibilities of knight to e5. And in this game, after a6, immediately knight to e5 was played. Notice here, however, that even though it seems that after the queen moves to d6, there's this alignment, so knight takes c6 is winning a piece, you're not actually winning a piece, because the queen can simply move, and there's two pieces attacked for white. And so therefore you're not winning much material. The best you could probably do is go bishop a4 here, so you cannot take with the queen. You have to kind of wreck up your structure, and then castle and queenside is probably less possible here. And white could continue an attack later on with c4, putting a rook on the c-file, going for these pawns, and white is in a great position here. So that's probably the best you could do, but black could have avoided all of this by simply playing queen to e6. Whenever you have the ability to put a queen in line with a bishop, you should never do that. You should look for other possibilities, because then there are some possibilities like knight takes c6 here, and again, you're not actually losing material. In this case, bishop to e2 was played, but it could have been unfortunate if bishop a4 was played. You have to kind of wreck your structure. So bishop e2, queen takes, and now c3, the knight gets developed, the knight comes to f3, and then to e5. So there's this pretty cool knight maneuver here. Notice that very early on, this knight that was on f3 by starting at g1 was traded off. So having a knight on e5 is a very powerful piece, which is why Pokimane wanted to kind of resupply that knight with the other knight. We have a trade here. The bishop hops back, the bishop hops back again, and then h5. So a really cool idea here by black, understanding that my king is on the queen side. I don't care about my my king side pawn structure. For all I care, all these pawns could be gone, because I know white is most likely going to castle kingside, and I'm just going to be able to use these open files to attack. And so throwing these pawns at the king side is a very smart play here by black. I like this. We have h4. Of course, there's also the threat of getting the bishop trapped, perhaps. So h4 trying to stop that threat. And then b4. Whenever you do a pawn push, you have to be careful, because every pawn push weakens squares. For example, here, the a3 and c3 squares become a lot more weak, because there's no more, there's no longer a pawn defending them. So after b4, specifically looking at c3, there's a pawn there. Black simply can take that pawn. And here you kind of have to move your king, because if you block with the queen, you hang the rook. Notice that when the queen and rook are on the same rank, they work very nicely together, because, this queen will never be able to take any of them for free. Whereas the second you move a queen to a different rank, then there's that, possibility where black can take the rook, and this is exactly what happened in the game. Pokimane now blocked with the queen, so she is down a lot of material. And here Rubius had a possibility to trade queens and go into a very pleasant endgame, or take a free pawn. And the engine might think that taking a free pawn is best because, hey, it's more material. But I personally think that taking the queen is a lot better here. And this is simply because of practical reasons. Notice that if you go here, white still has a queen. And, white could start to try to launch an attack possibly along this king. Whereas if you trade with the queen, it's much harder for let's say they take with the bishop, it's much harder for white to launch an attack here. They just don't have enough resources. And so as a general rule of thumb, even if you could take an extra pawn, if you're up a rook and you have the ability to trade queens, take that ability. You're going to a very pleasant endgame. But here after queen takes a2, it gives white the ability to castle. We have bishop to c2. White now can activate the rook, and, there could be some unpleasant things along this file here. Once the bishop moves back, the king went to b8, lining itself up with the bishop. So rook to c2 was played here, winning the queen, and Pokimane is not only back in the game, but she's actually better here, up material. And so look at how quickly things switched, and the only reason for that is that there was a queen in the game. If the queens were off, rook to c2 here would not win a queen, the best you could do. You could still win a rook perhaps, but you wouldn't be able to win so much material. So it's just safer. So to limit your opponent's ability to win material, it's safer to trade even if you could have won an extra pawn. And this is a perfect example of that. And immediately Pokimane is not only back in the game, but like I said, she's up material. She's actually winning now. She wins the knight. Perfect endgame fashion here. She goes to promote the pawn. There is one more tricky situation here. The rook's obviously threatening checkmate. White has a checkmate of their own on a6, but you shouldn't worry too much about finding checkmates. You can just move the bishop anywhere, give the king some room, which is exactly what she did. The king could escape. She puts the queen on f6, looking to promote the pawn. And she makes another queen. Here, she could have taken the rook. She's stressing out. She doesn't have time. She moves the king. Here, again, she could have taken the rook. But it's all good. She's up 2 queens. At this point in the game, you don't have to worry about playing the perfect moves as long as you're not blundering your queens, every move. Everything should be okay. Perfect endgame fashion using the knight maneuver to get the king trapped in a corner. It only has 2 squares. That's when you bring the king over and deliver checkmate. So beautiful endgame technique by Pokimane, and she has won the first game. Let's move on to game number 2. In game 2, Rubius has the white pieces. We have e4, and Pokimane goes for the French defense, knight to c3, and now c5, which I do believe is theory, but it isn't so common. You get this very strange position in the center where there's 2 pairs of pawns staring at each other, and there's this constant tension. In the game, we have knight to f3 developing, now knight to f6, adding more pressure to this pawn, and the bishop goes to pin the knight, but now the bishop unpins the knight, so notice this knight is now adding more pressure. In fact, this pawn is suddenly hanging, and so here, bishop check, and now bishop to d7, you should probably take the bishop, they take, and then do something about this pawn. Push it, take it, do something, maybe defend it, because this pawn is very weak here. But instead, by moving the bishop back, you allow black to perhaps trade once and then take, maybe even take right now. But the problem is this pawn is super weak here in the center of the board. And if you lose this pawn, which is exactly what Rubius unfortunately did, he lost his pawn, then the whole center for you is starting to collapse here. We have the knight jumping into the center with e5, the knight coming to c6. Here you could have simply taken this other center pawn, giving you, a wonderful center here. You have both pawns on e4 and e5, or e4 and d4, which is really rare for black to have that, but that would have been pretty cool. But instead, knight to c6 maybe gives white some chances, because thereafter takes, you can take this pawn with the knight, and suddenly this is probably just an even game. You can eventually castle. If takes here takes, you could have a queen trade into a roughly even endgame. So this would have been a good option for white here to take this knight and then go for the trades. But instead, the bishop hops back, and you lose this other pawn in the center. And immediately, black's extra center control, having these pawns, even though they look very kind of spread out and they don't look so nice here in the center, kind of together, it still is center control that black has, and white has absolutely none of that. We have c3 kicking the knight back, and now b4 going for some sort of queenside expansion, but of course after takes, the bishop can simply take here. You could have also taken with a knight in this case, but the bishop takes, and now queen to b3, setting up a pretty nasty idea. The knight is the only defender for the bishop, so knight takes, knight here, and after they take back, followed by queen takes bishop, is a threat, and black does not see it, so like I'll show it on the board, knight takes knight, and if they take back, you win the bishop. So this is a very big threat here that white is setting up, but they don't play it. They play rook attacking the queen, and you might think, well, okay, once the queen moves, you can still do this, but that's not the case, because the queen can come to e7 and defend the bishop, so after takes, you can't take the bishop because the queen is suddenly defending it. And so here, Pokimane does a great job to not lose material. We have the rooks centralizing on d1 and c1, which are the 2 open files on the board. You don't always have to put your rooks on e1 and d1 or e8 and d8. Here, it doesn't make a lot of sense to have a rook on the e file, specifically for black, because all these pawns are black's pawns. It's not going to be able to do much. And so, it would have made sense maybe to put the rook instead on c8 and d8 for black, and to match these 2 rooks here. We have a rook trade in the middle, and now another rook trade offered, but Pokimane does not get the rook trade. Instead, she is the one to take the rook. We have here e takes on f3. We have a trade of pawns, and both players are simply simplifying the position until this really beautiful tactic is possible. Queen to c5 check, and a really cool resource here by white. It seems as though if the king moves, you lose your knight, but by blocking with the queen, you are defending the knight through the other queen. So a really cool idea here, but of course you are dropping the bishop. So it's a little unfortunate how powerful this queen is here in the middle of the board, and Pokimane gets a very quick advantage. There's also now the ability to maybe play bishop to c5 and win the queen. So there are more traps, and I think the big reason as to why all of these tactics and chances are here for black is because of how, if we compare the safety of the two kings. This king, there's this f-pawn that eventually was traded, and it makes this diagonal very weak for black. If there was an f-pawn here, most of these tactics would not exist. There maybe were some checkmating ideas, but if you, perhaps played h3, then that wouldn't exist either. So you have to really worry about having a good pawn structure like the one that I'm showing on the screen with the green squares. Whereas if you kind of go for something like this, maybe put the king on h1 so it's less exposed in the center of the board, right? This queen coming towards the center of the board suddenly attacks the king too. If it's on h1, it's harder to attack it. And if you put, the pawn on h3, you also have an escape square, so there's no back ring checkmate. So these sort of pawn structures next to the king are crucial to limit the amount of tactics that your opponent has in the middle game, because truthfully, that is one of the biggest things that happens. We have here just giving away a free knight. Queen to a7, blundering checkmate. Pokimane could play queen to e1 checkmate here. She doesn't see it, but of course it's fine. She's up so much material, and I actually like this move as well. She maybe was worried of back rank checkmate. Of course, there were many resources that could stop that, but there's no reason to have any sort of stress in a position like this as black. Simply playing h6 or g6, opening up some sort of gateway for your king, and then you could start looking for ways to attack. I love this sort of defensive move, even if you're up material. We have queen to f4, and now a beautiful checkmating idea, bishop to c5, and once the king goes down, queen to f1 checkmate. So Pokimane wins this game as well. A really nice game by black here. I think that she found this really cool queen to c5 idea using all of these forks and using this very open king. And then also I will mention this this idea of h6, even though it's not necessary here. It's just to take away any sort of stress from black. So great games here by Pokimane. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you subscribe for more content like this, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.